What is going on, everybody? Julio here. In today's lesson, I'm going to be teaching you how you can animate a website like a pro. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. So this particular project is one that I modeled after this project created by Mario Carrillo. And as you can see, it's really cool. I really like the layout with the lines as well as the animations here on load. And I think he's using GSAP for the animations and then Three.js for the blobs. So I figured, you know what, let me go ahead and recreate this and then create all the animations using just plain CSS as well as a little bit of JavaScript for the mouse cursor, which we don't have here. And then I'm using images as opposed to the blobs, obviously. But I think it's going to be really fun. So let's jump right into VS Code so that we can get started. So this right here is going to be the main file structure. If you plan on following along, make sure that you grab the files from the link in the description below. So here I have a silly name for my main directory. Then I have an assets folder with several subfolders for the CSS, images, as well as JS. And then finally my index. Then within the style sheet here, you're going to have the font already imported, some custom properties, and then a basic reset here just to save some time. And then an empty JS file. So let me just go ahead and minimize this so that we have more room to work with. I'm also going to open this up in the browser. This is going to be a mobile first project. The mobile version of this is not going to be very fancy at all. It's actually going to be pretty basic, but we're still going to do it anyways. And then later on, we're going to get to the good part, which is actually building out the fancy desktop version. So if I can just line this up properly right here, right there. And now we are ready to begin. So the first thing that we are going to do is go over the index.html here. So I already linked my style sheet, and then I also linked my script, which has the deferred keyword. And this just tells the browser to wait until the document has been parsed before executing the script, which is in terms basically the same thing as putting it all the way down here. So the first thing that we're going to do here is have a div. This div is going to have the class of tracker, and this is going to be for the mouse cursor. I'm also going to give this a class of SM hidden, and this class is going to be just to hide certain things on mobile devices. Then underneath of here, I'm going to have a div that is going to be the main section itself. So this section is going to have a class of showcase. Then inside of it, we're going to have an anchor tag for the logo. And we're going to name this logo. We can just point this back to the index.html. And then inside of here, we are going to have an image. For this demo, I'm going to be using my logo. And this can be found inside of the assets, images, and then logo SVG. We're not going to go too much into accessibility here, so I'm just going to leave this alt empty. And once we have the logo, the next thing is going to be the nav. So we're going to use the nav element with the class of navbar. And this one, we're going to use a utility class of vertical center. And this is just for centering things in between its own cell. Then I'm going to give this a class of line as well as line vertical. And this is what we're going to be using alongside pseudo elements so that we can create the layout with the lines later on within the desktop view. Now we're just going to have a UL, LI, although I could have done that a lot faster by using Emmet. And then the link is going to have a class of link. And this is not going to go anywhere, so we can just leave it empty. And now, since we already have the basic structure here, we can just go ahead and duplicate this down below as many times as needed. So I need it 4 times. First one is going to be for home. Then here we can do pricing. Then what we can do is testimonials. And then finally, we're going to have dashboard. So we actually have a link that we don't need. So let's go ahead and delete this. And then the final one is going to have a class of Excel hidden. And we are going to use this to hide it on larger screens. Then outside of this nav, we are going to have an anchor tag. And this one is going to have a class of link, since we want to share the same styles as this, as well as a second class of link dashboard, if I can actually type correctly, as well as SM hidden, because we want to hide it on smaller devices. And here we are going to do the same with vertical, center, and then the same thing for the lines. So line, vertical, just like so. And for the content itself, we're just going to do the dashboard. So we're going to hide one on small screens, and then which is going to be this one. And then on larger screens, we're going to hide this one from the nav and just show this one. So underneath of this, and don't mind the spacing, I'm just doing this so that it's more readable. We are going to have the main heading element. So we're going to be using an H1, and this H1 is going to have the class of title, as well as the class of line and line horizontal, as opposed to vertical. And then for the animation purposes, we're going to be using a class of overflow hidden, which is going to do just that. We're going to be hiding the overflow by using a class. And inside of here, we're going to be using a span, and this span is going to have the animation itself. So I'm going to be using certain classes to apply the animation to, as opposed to applying it directly to, let's say, H1 span and so on. It's just a lot easier this way, especially if you have some things in common. And the reason why I'm nesting the text inside of a span is because of the overflow. Because if we don't hide the overflow here, what happens is that, for example, the text is going to fly in, as opposed to the demo where it just like flies in, but you don't see the rest of where it's coming from. So as far as the class here, this is going to be to right, since this is where we are going to be animating it from. And then we're going to use a class has in common, which is going to be for properties that this element is going to share in common with other elements. And we're also going to be adding a delay here, and we're going to be doing it as a custom property. So this one is going to have a style, and then we're going to name the custom property delay. And this one is going to be 0 seconds. And you're going to see how all of this comes into play later on. So here for the text, we're going to say top tier. And now we're going to have an H2. So this is going to be pretty similar here. So let me just go ahead and just duplicate it down below. Let's be a little lazy right now. Then we're going to change the heading to a heading number 2. And now we just have to update the classes. So for example, we have to remove this title as well as line. And instead, we're going to say subtitle, like so. We still keep the overflow though. Then the H2 is also going to animate from the right, and it has in common. Then for the delay itself, we're going to do 0.15 seconds. And then for the text, we can just say automation. Then underneath of this, we're going to have a div, and this div is going to hold the vertical text that we had before. And we're just going to be changing the writing mode basically so that we can get the vertical text. And we're going to actually rotate it as well so that we can make it more readable. But again, we'll worry about that later. So this div in particular is going to have a class of vertical text. Then we're also going to have a class of line as well as line vertical. So we have to nest this within another div, and this div is going to have a class of vertical text inner, as well as the overflow of hidden. Again, this is for animation purposes and because we also have to nest this and always to change the writing mode later on properly, since we are going to be rotating certain elements. And then finally, inside of here, we're going to have the span itself, which we are going to animate to the bottom. And then we'll use has in common as well, like so. We also need a delay, so let's make sure we specify that. And this delay is going to be over 0.25 seconds. And there's no particular reason. You can actually play around with the delays depending on how you want your animation sequence to go. This just happens to be the way that I did it. And now we can just say here, the future is now. And I don't know if you can hear that, but there's actually somebody in the background honking the car's horn. Hopefully the microphone didn't pick it up, but no, it is what it is. So yeah, so underneath of this div, we're now going to have the description itself. So for this, we're going to have a div that has the class of description, then line horizontal. Inside of here, we're going to have a p tag, and we're also going to need a class here, which is going to be the overflow hidden. And then inside of it, we're going to have a span. The span is going to be animated to the bottom. And it's going to have the class of has in common as well. And then finally, we're going to add a delay. And the delay here is going to be 0.35 seconds. Like so. Then for the text itself, we can just use some dummy text here, like so. And we just need a few more things. So we need some stuff for the footer as well as the images. We also need that CTA. So underneath of here, we're going to have an anchor tag with the class of CTA. Then we're also going to apply the class of link, then scale, rotate. And finally, has in common. Keep forgetting, but we also need a delay here as well. Let me just be a little bit lazy here. Just copy it from here, paste it in, and now we can just go ahead and update the value. So this value here is going to be 0.75. Actually, remove the 0 since we don't need it. No, that's good. So for the text itself, what we're going to do is just say take, and then we're going to add a BR here to break the line, and then control, like so. So now the last thing that we need here is going to be the two footer items. So for this, we're going to have a span with a class of copyright, then copyright, year, line vertical, like so. Then we can use ampersand copy to generate the copyright symbol, and then we can say 2022. Finally, the other one is going to be exactly the same. So let me just copy it down below, give myself a space here so that it's more readable. And then we can just get rid of the text here. And what we can do is say automation X LLC, and then we can say all rights reserved. We also have to update the class here from year to name, and then vertical to horizontal, like so. So now the only thing that we have to do is add in the images. So for the images, we're going to be repeating the same images 3 times. So the first image is going to have a class of shape. Let me actually just scroll down a little bit so that it's visible. So shape then has in common, since we're going to be animating this as well. And then SM hidden, because we want to hide this on smaller screens. And we're also going to add in a data attribute, which is going to be something that we are going to manipulate later on using JavaScript. So we're going to call this data offset. And this is going to be a really small number of 0.5. Then we also need a delay here as well. So for the delay, we can do, let's do 0.5, like so. And let's not forget one of the most important parts, if not the most important part, the source itself. So images, and then we're going to be using 1. So this is when I downloaded it initially from Figma. I forgot to change the name, but you know, in the real world, for not necessarily accessibility purposes, but just to have a description, it's better if you actually name your images to something that is related to what you're doing. That way you know what it is. So with that out of the way, we can duplicate this down below 2 more times. And now all we have to do is just update the classes as well as the offsets and delays. So for the delay on the second one, we can do 0.25 seconds. Then on the final one, we can do 0.35. Now let's go ahead and update the offset. So for the first one, we did 0.05. Then for the other one, we're going to do 0.025. And then for this one, we can just do 0.02. Now for the classes, so for the second one, what we're going to do is here give it a second class of shape, MD for medium. Don't forget to give yourself a space there. And I think this is all. And now let me just be lazy here and copy it, paste it here. And we're going to name this shape LG for large. And this is everything that we need for this particular example. Hopefully I didn't break anything or made a mistake, but if anything, we'll just come back to it later. So as far as the CSS, as I mentioned, I'm importing some fonts here from Google Fonts. Then I'm creating some custom properties for the colors. Although this is how I initially was going to do the responsive mode by having different columns, but in reality, we don't need it because we're going to be using template columns for this anyways. So I changed my mind in that regards. And then here we're just going to do a basic reset of the margins and paddings and setting box sizing to border box because it's going to make the calculations a lot simpler. Then for the HTML, I'm making the root font size 10 pixels since I work with rems, and then we use percentages so that it scales a lot better. Then for the body, we set the background color, font sizes, as well as font family. And then we just apply a basic reset for the rest of the elements that you see here. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and work on the showcase. So for the showcase, we're going to give this a position of relative since we're going to have elements with position absolute, which we want to position absolutely relative to the showcase. For example, the before that we're going to be using for the grain animation. Then in here, also going to give this a height of 100 BH, and then a padding all around for spacing of 2 rem. Then we're going to text align all the content to the center. And then we're going to give this an overflow hidden. Actually, we don't have to do that because we're going to be creating a utility class for this. So we can just do overflow hidden like so. Then we're going to select the showcase. We're going to create the pseudo element before. we're going to specify the content property to an empty string so that the element shows up, because by default, it's going to be none. Then we're going to make this position a fixed so that it floats over everything. And we're going to make the top negative 150%. And then the left is going to be negative 100% so that we can move it over, because we're going to be making this really large. Then finally, we're going to be using a Z index of -1 just to place it behind everything. And the width is going to be 350%. Then the height is going to be 350% as well. Then what we're going to do here is add the image itself. So background, image, URL, and we can just go ahead and go inside of the assets folder again. Why isn't it showing up? Oh, there we go. Then the images folder and then green PNG. Like so. And then for the opacity, we can just turn that down a bit. And we can do 0.25. You can play around here with the value. You can make it 0.50, whatever it is, you know, it just depends on your preference. For me, this is what works. We're also going to give this showcase here isolation of isolate. And this is going to create a new stacking context, and it's going to make it so that, for example, if we ever had a background here, it would actually like fall behind it. So we don't want that. And although we don't really need a background because we have it in the body, but it doesn't matter, we'll add it anyways. So this just says that this particular element will not fall behind its parent. And we're going to be animating the green later. But for now, we're going to just focus on the rest of the layout. So for the logo here, what we're going to do is select the image, and we're going to give this a width of 3.5 rem just to make it smaller. And then we're going to give this a margin inline of auto just to center it, like so. Then for the navbar, we're going to give this a padding block, which is going to be padding top and bottom. And it's going to be 1.5. That's going to give us some separation there. Now I'm going to select the UL inside of the navbar. And this will have a display of flex. Then we're also going to wrap the items down. So flex, wrap, wrap, like so. And this is just going to activate once we don't have enough space here. So it's just going to wrap down. Then justify the content to the center. And then we're going to give this a gap. 1 rem here for the row, and then 2 rem for the column. And now you're going to see a wrap down since it doesn't have no space. Now we're going to use the utility class of, let me actually make a comment. Utility classes. And so in here, we can just say something like SM hidden. And what we're going to do here is say display none. So now everything that has that class is going to be hidden, like so. Then underneath of here, we're going to select the title, and we're going to make this some this typography, I guess, responsive in a sense. So we're going to be using a lot of viewport units. So for this, we're going to give this 11 VW. Then we're also going to give this a font weight of 700. And then text transform to uppercase. Now we're going to select the subtitle. The subtitle is going to have a font size that is going to be slightly smaller at 4 BW. The font weight is going to be lighter here. I think I did, the lightest one that I have is 400. So technically, we don't even have to specify 400 because that's the default. But we're going to give this a padding bottom, which is going to be 2 rem. Then for the description, we can do a padding block here for separation top and bottom of 2 rem. Then we're going to select the description. Well, I already did the description. And this actually should be a little bit larger at 3. What I'm going to do now is select the CTA. And the CTA will be a display of block because by default, the anchor tag is going to be inline element. And then we're going to create separation here with a padding bottom, which is going to be 1 rem. And I always find it funny how sometimes I'll use emit for the abbreviations, and then some of the times I'll just like type it out or click on it. Now we are going to actually style the shapes. So for example here, if we just comment this out, we should see them again, just for this particular purpose. So here the main shape dimensions is going to be, actually let me just specify the top, position, absolute. Then first I'll do a bottom for the first one, and then we're going to override some of those values. And then the left is going to be 25 of the W. C index, -1. And now for the width, here we're going to make this 10 VW. Then we're going to fade this in a little bit, so we're going to be using 0.25. Then we're going to use user select. And we're going to say none. So this means that we're not going to be able to, for example, highlight it. And then we're going to be using the WebKit user drag. Same thing, so that we are not able to drag it around like you see right there. And we can just say none, like so. So now if we try, you see that it doesn't work. Then we're going to target the different ones. So medium. Medium is going to be positioned to the top here. And we're going to be doing 2.5 BW. And I actually should have waited to do this later on within the desktop version. This way you could have gotten a bit of idea, but let me just make it bigger for now since these values are actually for the desktop version. Doesn't matter anyways, the end result is still the same. You just don't get to see it in action until later on, that is. So for the left, we're going to be doing 2.5 BW here. And this should be BH. And then the width here is going to be, let's do 15 BW, like so. Now we're going to select the large one. And this one is going to have a top of 25 BH. Then what we're going to do is a right of 10 BW. This one is also going to be a lot larger. Actually, this should be -10. And since we already have a left position specified on the main one, we also have to turn it off by setting it to auto. And then the width is going to be 80 of the BW, like so. So the next thing that I'm going to do next is play around with the media queries now so that we can make this, I guess, responsive in a way. And I guess I'm going to make this larger now, just making sure that I hide this for now since we're going to be showing it later. And we can go ahead and just play around with the media queries now. So here I'm going to say add media screen, and let's go ahead and specify the breakpoint and min width. And for this one, we're going to do 1024 pixels, which is going to be 64 EM. And I'm using 64 EM just because, well, like I said, that's what it equals to 1024 pixels, but I'm using the EM units because just in case that the user has a preference set up within the browser. Then what I'm going to do now is reset all the paddings that we have here. So I'm going to select the showcase. Then we're going to say showcase, and everything that is a direct child that is not a link. And then we're just going to say padding 0, like so. And the reason why you don't see it take change is because it's not big enough yet. As you can see right there. Actually, let me just leave it right there. Then I'm going to go ahead and get started with the layout itself. So here again, showcase. This is going to be the main grid container. But first, let's text align everything back to the left. The height. Did I set a height already here? Yes, I did. So I don't need to set it again. So for the height, like I said, it was going to be 100 pH before. And now we can just go ahead and make this a display of grid. Then grid template columns, and we're going to have 5 of them. The first one is going to be 10 rem. Then the second one is going to be 12, back to 10 rem. And then the other ones are going to be 1 fraction each, like so. For the grid template rows, we're going to have 5 as well. So the first one is going to be 8 rem, then min content, and then we're going to have 1 fraction, and then finally for the footer area we're going to have 5 rem. Then what we're going to do is specify some grid areas, and grid areas is really powerful because they kind of allow you to visualize the layout that we want. So for example, here I want my logo. Let me just make this. What I'll do is actually bring it to the next line. Then we're going to remember we have 5. So there's like 5 possible spaces. What we're going to do is just use dot notation here to create an empty space. Then we want to position the nav bar here. Then we're going to position the dashboard link. Like so. And you're not going to see any change now. That's because I still need to specify the grid areas themselves. So let me just again bring this down because we still need several more. So now we can just update this. We don't want the logo anymore. We can just create another empty space, 2 more. And this is where I want to position my title. Right there. So my title is going to occupy the last 2. And just to not create any more confusion, if in case there are any, I'm gonna stop just like the copying down below and just do it from scratch. So again, we're going to use dot notation here to create some empty spaces. So that's 4. The last one is going to be occupied by the subtitle. Then this is going to be for the 4th row, empty space, newsletter, empty space, description, CTA. Finally, empty space, year, name, empty space. So this is basically the layout. The next thing that we are going to be doing next is actually positioning the items where we want them to go. So now we can just go ahead here, and we can target the logo. We're going to say grid area. And now we just named the grid area. So here in our layout, we named the logo. So obviously we have to do logo here. Then what we're going to do is give this a margin of auto, just to center it between its containers. So you can see it moved. Now it's centered within its space. Now we're going to select the nav bar. And the nav bar is going to be the same thing. Now we just name it nav bar and see how it moved over. So if you remember correctly, we also had a utility class here called, let's see, vertical center, that we're going to be using to center certain elements. But for now, let me just finish the layout, and then we're going to get to that later. So next thing that I want to do is actually, let me just go ahead and add a hover effect to the link and text decoration, underline. So if we hover over the links, you can see we get the underline, which is usually the default, but we removed it when we had the reset. Then we're going to position the dashboard link, dashboard, grid area, dashboard, like so. Just make sure that's what I named it. Yes, dashboard. Now we're going to position the title, grid area title, subtitle, grid area, subtitle, like so. And just look at how easy it is to position elements using grid areas. And something I want to change here for the main title here is the line height as well. And in certain situations, when we make this larger, this nav bar is actually going to fall underneath of this text. So we're not going to be able to click it. So what we're going to do here is say pointer events none. So just kind of ignores it, and we can actually click through it. So here we're going to have a line height of 1 as well. And then we're going to have a margin, top and bottom. Actually, not top and bottom. We can just say margin top, 0.5 rem, like so. Then for the vertical text, here we're going to do is say grid area, newsletter. Then what I want to do here is change the font size to 3, viewport width, and text transform to uppercase. And then we also want to justify self to be end, like so. You're not going to see any change now, but you will later on once we turn on the vertical writing mode. And before I do that, let me actually just move this right out of the way so that we can better see it. So description, grid area, description, like so. And we're going to give this a max width of 80%. So now that we can actually see this a lot better, let's go ahead. And now we can say vertical text inner, And we can change the writing mode here to be vertical right here, like so. But notice how it looks. So what we can do, if we had, for example, vertical RL, still going to be doing the same. But what we want to do here instead is basically flip it over. So what we have to do is use transform rotate. We can also use the rotate property, but it's not fully supported yet. So transform rotate function. And what we're going to do is rotate it by 180 degrees, like so. And now that's going to flip around like so. Then what we're going to do is target this class that had like the vertical alignment. And what we're going to do is just give that, for example, a display of flex as well as a align self of center. So let's just do that right here. Vertical center. And here we're going to give this a display of flex and then align self center, like so, and see how it moved down right here. What else? So there's a few things that I also want to change here. So utility classes. Just put that right here, format it. And now what I'm going to do, well, I'll leave that until I position everything. So let me just come here, and what I'm going to do is target the CTA, grid area, CTA. And now we can just go ahead and style it up a little bit. Align self, center, text align, center. Then for the font size, we can make that 5 VW. And the line height is going to be 8 rem. Font weight is going to be 700. And the text transform to uppercase, like so. Then I'm going to position the copyright. Well, first I'm going to make this a display of inline flex. And then align items to the center, like so. So it's just going to center the content vertically within its container. So now I can go ahead and select them separately. So we can say year, grid area, year. It's down here now. We can duplicate this down below, change this to name, and then change this to name as well. And now they're both together down here. So for the utility classes now, we can say that SM hidden is now going to be visible on desktop. And then we can just paste it down below and change the XL right here to hidden. Actually, none. Like so. We're almost there. So now we're actually going to lay out the lines. So for the lines, what we're going to do is say that the line itself is going to have a position of relative. Then we're going to be using the before pseudo elements. So line, vertical. And then we're also going to have one for horizontal, like so. And then here we're just going to use the before pseudo element on both to create the pseudo element that we want. So here, what we could also do, as opposed to just repeating the content, is just say that line before, and then the styles that they will share in common, which is going to be the content, the position, as well as the background. and this is going to be an RGBA. So the first value is going to be 82. Second value is 77, 73, and then 0.38 for the transparency. And now we can just go ahead and style them individually. So for the left, the vertical is going to be 0. The width is going to be right here, 1 pixel. And the height is going to be 500 of the VH. So we're going to be making it very large so that it fills up all the content that we have here. And then for the top itself, let me actually just do the top here. Since we have to move it up, like you see here, we are missing some spaces. We're going to do, again, a really large value, which is from the example that I showed you before, just to move it over slightly. And remember, we also had the overflow class. So let me just add it to the utilities here outside of the media query. So overflow hidden, overflow hidden, like so. So now the scroll bars are gone. But anyways, back to the media query. Scroll all the way down to the bottom. We're now going to work on the horizontal lines. And again, actually, what I could have done here is just, never mind. So here top will be 0. Then the left is going to be the same value that we had right here for the top, but it's going to be on the left. So negative 250 of the VW as opposed to the VH. And for the width, we're going to be using 500 as well, just to make it extremely large. And then for the height, you want it to be 1 pixel, just so that it matches the consistency. And left looks good. And if I make this larger, we can now see that it looks exactly like the demo, minus the animations. So let's go ahead and take care of that right now. Just make this larger here. So for the animations themselves, I'm going to be placing it inside of a media query for prefers reduced motions, just because in the real world, not everybody wants to see your animations, especially people with disorders that can be triggered by, fast movements, scales, and that type of thing. So this is the reason why I'm going to do it inside of a media query. And also because, for example, I'm going to be hiding some elements by default by using the opacity of 0. So let's say that a person actually had the preference set to reduce, then they would just get an empty page, which is not what we want. So here, what we can say is add media. And here we can say prefers reduced motion. And then the values are reduced. And then the other value is no preference. So if the person here has no preference set, it's actually too small. That's fine. So if they have no preference set, we are going to go ahead and show the animations. So the animation that I want to add to the showcase is going to be the following animation. We haven't created it yet, but we're going to be creating it shortly. So grain, 5 seconds. It will take 10 steps and it will be infinite. So what we're going to do now is create the keyframe animation for this particular animation. So we're going to say, let me just have a comment here first, keyframes. So we're going to have a comment here, and then we're going to say add keyframes. For the name itself, we're going to call this grain, and then at the starting 0 this percent, as well as the end 100%, we're going to transform, translate, and it's going to be 0. Then for 10%, should be 10%, we're going to transform, translate, negative 5%, negative 5%, and then negative 10%, like so. And it looks kind of choppy right now, but don't worry, we're going to be fixing that shortly. Then what we're going to do is set the additional steps that we want. So here it's going to be 20%. Then we're going to set this to 15, 5, like so. Let me just format it a little bit better. 15.5, 30%, 7, 25. Actually going to be negative, and this one is going to be a positive. Then for 40%, we're going to be doing negative 5 and then positive 25. At 50%, and my mistake, this actually should be on the before pseudo element. Before. So now only the green should be moving like so. And that already looks fine, as you can see, up until it gets to that certain point towards the end. So what we have to do is just continue with the rest of the steps so that we can make it more cohesive. I don't know if cohesive is the right word, but you know, just so that it looks actually more fluid. Yeah, fluid sounds a lot better. But here at 60%, what we want to do is, well, I already had the values here. So all I should have done is just copy and paste. So at 60%, we're just going to translate by 15% on both the X and Y. Then at 70%, we are going to do just the Y. And we only need one value here, which is going to be 15%. Then we have 80%. And again, I could have just, you know, copied and pasted, but kind of slipped my mind there. So 35%. And the last one is going to be 10 and 10. And this one is going to be a negative on the x-axis. And that's the green animation right there. So what I'm going to show you now is the setting itself. So here we have, for example, settings. Here I can say animations. As you can see, we have animations turned on, but what happens if we turn it off? Notice how after it takes effect, now the green animation stops. So that's exactly why we are putting it inside of this prefers reduce motion. And then if they have no preference set, it will show the animation. If they do have a preference, then it's just going to ignore this. And we're actually going to revisit this in a little bit, so I'll leave it open. So the next animation that we are going to target is going to be, and actually what I'm going to do is add the has in common class, because we're going to be specifying some things that certain animations have in common. So animation duration is going to be 1 second. Animation fill mode forwards, because we want to keep the last computed value of the keyframe. For example, this would be 100%. For words, and then the animation timing function is going to be a cubic best EI, which is going to be the following right here. And then we can just pass in the animation delay, which is going to be the variable. And this is really nice because normally what you would have to do is just go like nth child 1, 2, 3, and so on, so that you can just specify them individually. But with custom properties, we can just pass in the delay, and it's going to grab it from each one that we have right here, as opposed to, you know, having to go in manually. And for now, that's the only thing that we need. So for now, let's just leave it as it is. Then we're going to target to right. And we're going to make this a display of block. We're going to do the same thing to bottom. And initially the opacity is going to be 0. As you can see right there. So it's going to hide it by default here when the motion is set to no preference, because once we create this keyframe, we're going to show it and animate it in. But let me show you what happens. So if I turn it off, as you can see, it just shows. However, if I, for example, place this outside of this, what would happen is that it's going to be hidden by default. So that's why we are placing it inside of it. And now I can just turn back on my animations and close this because we don't really need it anymore. I already made my point. And now we can go ahead and just select to right. And we can set the animation name to right. We're going to create the other one as well, to bottom. And what we're going to do now is create the keyframes that are going to animate the text in. So keyframe at keyframe. And then this one is going to be to right. At 0%, well, we can just say from, which is going to reference the starting point. Opacity is going to be 1. Now it's going to show it, just like you can see right there. And then transform, translate, and notice how it disappeared. And that's because it's the first step. Once we add the final step, it's going to keep the computer styles for that. So it's not going to disappear anymore. So now what we're going to do is transform, translate Y. You just scroll down so that we can actually see it. So translate Y. We can move this up by negative 100%, and then 2 for the final state, or 100%. We can say that the opacity is still 1, because if we don't set it, it's just going to start vanishing again to its original point of opacity 0, which we set here. And then we can just say, actually, we can just say transform none, like so. And where did I go wrong here? Oh, that's because I set it to none. So I guess it's not going to work. So transform, translate Y, set it to 0 right there. And it's still disappearing Y. So to right has in common, should be keeping it for its animation fill mode. Something wrong there. Let me see. So animation, let me just double check here. To right, 1 second. Forwards. Okay, so it keeps it right there. Why isn't it keeping it before? So that's working. Animation fill mode. Did I make a mistake here? Forwards. Yes, I had a spelling mistake. Seems. Let me see. Yeah, so I was missing the R. That's why. I thought it was initially because of the transform none, but that shouldn't be an issue. As you can see right there. And actually, this is to right, not to the top, or to bottom, I should say. So this should be on the X. Just notice that. So like so. And the other one that we have to create now is going to be for the bottom. So to bottom. So the same concept here. The only difference is that we're going to change the Y like so. As you can see, that's working as well. So if you remember correctly what I said before, notice how they just animate in. You don't see where they animate from in terms of flying in. So for example, if I was to find the utility class here for the overflow, where are you? I just passed it right here. Notice what happens. So let me just make this bigger. See how it comes all the way from the left or the top, which is not exactly what we want. So this is the same reason why we nested it inside of span. So this way we can just hide the overflow of the parent and it just comes in from this particular spot as opposed to from all the way to the right or the top, which in reality doesn't look good at all. So you tell me, which looks better, what we had before or this? But anyways, we're almost there now. Let's go ahead and go back to the other animations. The first thing that I'm going to do is add in that's going to scale the images in. So keyframes, let me just duplicate this down below. So we're going to change the name, scale in. So from 0%, we want to scale 0. Then we can go ahead and scale back to 1. And this is the new way of doing transforms. Like I said, it's not fully supported, but if I use the transform, it's going to be, there's going to be some conflict later on with the JavaScript when we move the elements around. So as opposed to adding a little bit of JavaScript, I just decided to do it this way. It's a lot simpler, and sooner or later, it's going to have full support. As it is right now, it's only 80%, which is still pretty good, but hopefully soon enough, it's going to be over 90%. And the other one is going to be scale rotate, which is going to be for this text right here. Scale rotate. So here, scale 0, and then I want to rotate it 60 degrees. Scale 1, rotate 0. And as far as the keyframe animations, that should be it right there. What I'm going to do now is actually just add it to this as well as the images. So back to the top here, scale rotate. Here we can just scale this back to 0, scale. And then animation name, scale rotate. And we're also going to change the animation duration for this one and make it 0.5 seconds instead. So if we go ahead and reload that, it's going to scale in. And we also need this shape. And the shape is going to have, again, same thing, scale 0. And then the animation name is going to be scale in, like so. Then the animation duration, also going to overwrite this and make it 0.25 seconds. Like so. And that looks pretty good. We're also going to add a transition here on the translate, transition translate over 0.25 seconds. And this is going to be for moving the blobs around with the mouse when we add the JavaScript. But I want to make this a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is change the transform origin of where the images actually translate from, or scale in from, I should say. So what we're going to do now is scroll all the way to the top. And I guess here, since we don't show them until later on, what we can do is just delete it from here and actually paste it inside of the media query. It would make a lot more sense. So I'm going to place it all the way to the end right here. Actually, I'm going to place it before this. Actually, I think the utility classes are more important in this sense. So what I'm going to do is place it at the end. And as I said, now what we're going to do is just change the transform origin so that it just animates from a different spot. So transform origin, here we can do bottom left. As you can see, they just animate in from the bottom left. Then for the medium, we're going to change it to the top, which is going to be this one. So now these two will grow from the bottom left, and this one grows from the top. And then the larger one is going to have a bottom right. So now all of them are going to grow from different spots. And as you can see, it looks a lot better than it did before already, closer to the finished end product. So the only thing that we have to do now is add the mouse move window event that is going to animate the images that we have here, as well as the cursor. Actually, before I forget, we also need to add the cursor, and we can add it within the media queries here, since technically we are not going to be displaying it on mobile devices. So though if you wanted to, you could do that. So I'm just going to place it outside of it. It doesn't really matter where you place it. So it's just a tracker. Position is going to be fixed. C index is going to be a really high value just so that, you know, stays on top of all the content. Transform, translate, -50%, -50%, just to make sure that it's perfectly centered. Then the width here is going to be 40 pixels, which I'm going to set it in rems. And border radius, to make it round, is going to be 50%. Now for the border, we're going to do 1 pixel, solid, and then D8, D8, D8. Then what I'm going to do is give this a pointer event. As you can see, we can see it right here. Pointer events, and set it to none, because if we don't, then we're not going to be able to click things such as the link, since it's going to be basically right on top of it, preventing us from clicking. And then I'm going to add a filter here. Well, not a filter, but a mixed blend mode of difference, so that when we hover over things that are of the same color, we get a different accent. Then to not make this too complicated, I'm just going to add a transition here within the CSS of the top. And we're going to make it really slow. Then we're going to do the same thing for the left. 0.075 as well. And finally, the opacity, 0.5s. And the reason for that is because initially I don't want to see it, so that because it's always going to be on this top corner. So let me just go ahead and hide it, and then we can show it within the mouse move event. This should be actually 0. So this was here SM hidden. So we can just go ahead. Well, we can just remove this. It doesn't really matter again, since we are actually going to be placing it within the media query itself. And then we can just put it all the way down here. Cursor tracker. So now it's time for the fun part. We're almost there. So we're going to be starting off by creating a function. So constant move elements. And this is going to be an arrow function. Hate it when Prettier does that every time I format the code. But here we're going to have another variable inside of it. This is going to be for all the shapes or the images. And here we can do document.query selector, and we don't actually need to see the rest of it here. So query selector all, and we just say that we want to grab all the shapes. And then we want to loop over all the shapes, and we want to apply certain styles. So for this, we're going to be using a for each. So we'll say shapes for each, and then shape, which is going to be our placeholder. And what we want to do in here is declare another variable, which I'm going to call shape offset. And then I'm going to get the attribute from all the shapes. So shape get attribute. And the attribute that we want to get is going to be the data offset, like so. Now, what we are going to do is basically do a little bit of math based on the window inner width and height. So for this, I'm going to declare a let variable called offset x. And then we're going to do a little bit of math. We want this math in particular to happen first, or evaluated first. So we are going to be putting it inside of the parentheses. So we're going to say window inner width minus e client x times the shape offset. Then we're going to do the same thing here, and this is going to be for the y. So client y. And here we're going to do the inner height, and we're going to call this offset y, like so. Then here, we just want to apply this particular offset to all the shapes. So we're going to select the shapes again. And what we want to do is change the style, translate, and then we're going to use a template literal here, which is going to be the offset plus the amount of pixels. And then this other value as well, px. And the second value is going to be the offset y. And the first one is going to be the offset x. What we have to do now is add the event listener to the document. which is going to be a mouse move. And we just call the function here, move elements. So if we go back to the project, this now should work. And it does, as you can see. Let me just make it full screen. Everything is working properly. So the last thing that we have to do is just deal with the tracker. So back inside of Visual Studio Code is going to be pretty simple as well. Let me just define another variable here. So instead of query selector all, what we're going to do is just say tracker, and we're going to rename this to tracker. And then here, just do it on top of the shapes for each. You could do it on the bottom, doesn't really matter as long as it's not inside of it. But here we just want to change some styles. So we're going to say tracker style and then top. And all we want to do here is simply just, again, use a template literal. And we're going to get the E and then client Y for the top pixels. And then we're going to do the same thing for the X. And this one is going to be for the left, like so. Now, if we go ahead and try that out, it's not going to work. I mean, technically it's working, but we are not going to be able to see it. And that's because we still have to add in the opacity. Because remember that we initially hid this element. So tracker style, we can actually group this into an object too if we wanted to, but we're just going to keep it simple. Opacity, and we're going to be setting that to 1. So now this should work. And as you can see, it disappears if I reload, but once I enter, it just kind of fades in with the slight transition delay. Well, not delay, but the duration. And there you have it. This is how you can create your own animations from scratch using CSS keyframes as well as a little bit of JavaScript to create the interactions that you see right here. So if you found this video useful, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you learned something new and want to keep learning some more, make sure that you subscribe for new videos.